Hey guys, this video isn't just a list of brain puzzles. It's a slow fall into some of the strangest questions we've ever asked about life, time, and reality. You don't need to solve anything, you just have to listen. Let's get to it. The Crocodile Paradox. Imagine this. A crocodile surfaces from a dark river and snatches a child. The desperate parent pleads for their return. The crocodile pauses and says, "I will return your child, only if you correctly predict what I will do next." Without hesitation, the parent says, "You will not return my child." Now the crocodile has a problem. If he decides to return the child, then the parent's prediction was wrong, which means he shouldn't return the child. But if he keeps the child, then the parent's prediction was right, which means he must return the child. Either way, he breaks his own condition. He's trapped in a loop. This is the Crocodile Paradox. A thought experiment that sounds like a twisted riddle, but it reveals something much deeper about logic, promises, and self-reference. At first it sounds absurd, a moral problem dressed up as a puzzle, but it's more than that. It's a no-win scenario. A situation where the rules contradict themselves, where trying to follow the logic leads to its breakdown. This paradox is part of a bigger family, problems where self-reference turns everything inside out, just like the liar paradox, or the promise of a time traveler not to change the past. It shows us that language, predictions, and even ethics can fail when they're forced to refer back to themselves. And that's the unsettling part. Because in real life, we make these kinds of deals all the time. We build systems on promises. We use logic to make decisions, but sometimes those systems feed into themselves and collapse under their own weight. The Crocodile Paradox is more than just a mind game. It's a quiet warning that not all conditions can be honored when they fold back into themselves. Sometimes the more certain we try to be, the more impossible the situation becomes. The Forgetting Paradox. What if forgetting is the only way we can truly remember? The Forgetting Paradox asks a quiet but unsettling question. Can memory exist without loss? It seems contradictory. We spend our lives trying to hold on to things, names, faces, moments, meaning. We take photos, write journals, mark anniversaries, all to keep memory alive. But here's where it gets strange. Our brains are constantly deleting information. If they didn't, we'd be overwhelmed, buried beneath a mountain of noise. You forget the majority of what you experience, and yet somehow this forgetting makes room for the things that matter to rise to the top. That's the paradox. In order to remember what's important, your brain has to forget what's not. If you remembered everything, every word spoken, every glance, every smell, your mind would be cluttered, unable to prioritize, paralyzed by detail. You wouldn't be wiser. You'd be stuck. Even your most treasured memories are shaped by forgetting. You don't remember the whole moment. You remember fragments, reconstructions, feelings stitched together by absence. And here's another twist. Sometimes forgetting creates meaning. You forget the boring parts of a relationship, and what's left is warmth or pain or longing. The gaps become the story. So maybe forgetting isn't the enemy of memory. Maybe it's the engine behind it. Because to truly remember something, we have to let go of everything it wasn't. And that's the paradox. Forgetting is not just a failure, it's a function, a filter, a form of memory in disguise. The Memory Rewind Paradox. If you could rewind your memories like a movie, would you be closer to the truth or further from it? This is the Memory Rewind Paradox, a haunting idea that challenges the way we remember, forget, and define who we are. We often say, if only I could go back and relive that moment. And in theory, perfect memory would let us do just that. Play it back, pause, zoom in, feel it again. But here's the paradox. The more you replay a memory, the more you risk rewriting it. Each time you revisit the past, you don't just remember it, you reshape it, subtly, unconsciously, sometimes entirely. The act of remembering is not like opening a file, it's more like repainting a scene, and every stroke, every emotion, every thought alters the original. So if you had the power to rewind perfectly, you might end up further from the truth. You'd trust the clarity while quietly drifting into fiction. And what about pain? Would you rewind a heartbreak, a trauma? Would seeing it again help you heal or lock you in? Because some memories only fade because we need them to. Our minds protect us by letting go. Rewinding could keep old wounds fresh forever. Then there's the deeper question. If you remember every detail of your past exactly, are you the same person you are now, or someone trapped in who you used to be? The Memory Rewind Paradox challenges the dream of perfect recall. It suggests that forgetting isn't always failure. Sometimes it's freedom, and sometimes the only way forward is by not being able to go back. The Archive Paradox. What happens when you try to preserve everything forever? You create a paradox where the more you try to remember, the more you forget. This is the archive paradox, a strange twist of time, memory, and meaning. Imagine an infinite library filled with every book ever written, every message ever sent, every moment ever captured. At first it seems perfect, nothing is lost. But over time, a strange problem emerges. When everything is saved, nothing stands out. When you try to record all of history, it becomes impossible to find what truly matters. Important memories drown in noise. Value gets lost in volume. The archive paradox shows up in our lives more than we think. Every photo backed up to the cloud, every email stored for years, every notification, document, or memory filed away in case we need it someday. But the result? We forget what it means to forget. We stop curating, and we start hoarding. And with too much information, meaning collapses. It becomes harder to decide what deserves attention, what holds weight. This paradox also plays out in culture. Societies build museums, monuments, databases, believing that archiving protects truth. But the more we preserve, the more we need interpretation. What you keep shapes what you see and what you forget. The archive paradox raises deep questions. Is forgetting always a loss, or sometimes a mercy? Can memories breathe if they're never allowed to fade? Too much memory can trap us in the past. Too much forgetting can erase who we are. The balance is fragile. And the archive paradox reminds us that to truly remember, we must also learn when to let go. Not everything needs to be kept. Some things only gain meaning when they're fleeting. The forgiveness paradox. Forgiveness sounds simple. Just let go of the pain and move on. But what if true forgiveness makes justice impossible? And what if justice makes true forgiveness impossible? Welcome to the forgiveness paradox. Imagine someone harms you deeply. They admit it, even apologize. Do you forgive them? If you do, are you saying their actions no longer matter? Or worse, are you letting them off the hook? But if you don't forgive them, are you choosing to carry pain forever, trapped by someone else's mistake? The paradox begins when you try to balance justice and healing. To forgive someone truly, you must let go of your need for revenge or fairness. But if you do that, aren't you dismissing the seriousness of what they did? In other words, if forgiveness is unconditional, it might seem unjust. If it's conditional on punishment, is it even forgiveness anymore? This contradiction gets deeper in society. Think about truth and reconciliation commissions, post-conflict justice, or even cancel culture. Should people be forgiven once they apologize? Or does forgiveness require consequences? Here's the twist. Some philosophers argue that forgiveness loses its power when it's earned. It only means something if it's freely given, when it's least deserved. Others say that kind of forgiveness is dangerous, that it enables harm, silences victims, and erodes accountability. So which is it? Can you forgive and still hold someone responsible? Can you release anger without erasing the truth? The forgiveness paradox doesn't give us easy answers. It sits in that uncomfortable space between mercy and memory. It reminds us that real healing is messy. Sometimes the most compassionate thing isn't letting go or holding on, but acknowledging the tension between the two. The Preface Paradox. Imagine finishing a book you've worked on for years. You've checked every chapter, verified every fact, edited every sentence. You believe everything in it is true. And then on the very first page you write a note saying, some parts of this book might be wrong. Wait, what? This is the strange contradiction at the heart of the Preface Paradox. It's named after something authors do all the time. They publish a book confidently, but in the preface, humbly admit that some errors may remain. You might think this is just modesty, but philosophers saw something deeper, a paradox that challenges how we define rational belief. Here's how it works. You believe each individual statement in your book is true, otherwise you wouldn't have written it. But based on experience, you also believe that in a book with hundreds of claims, at least one is probably wrong. So now you're holding two beliefs. Every individual statement is true. Not every statement is true. Both feel reasonable, yet together they contradict each other. This isn't just about books. It's about the structure of belief itself. Can you rationally believe that each piece is true, while also believing the whole might be flawed? Some argue that this is actually rational humility, an acknowledgement of human error. You do your best, but you know you're not perfect. Others say this reveals a deeper inconsistency, that we hold logically incompatible beliefs all the time, and just call it being practical. The Preface Paradox shows how certainty breaks down when scaled. Individually, your beliefs are solid. Collectively, they shake. This paradox lingers in science, journalism, education, anywhere people make many claims while accepting they're fallible. It reveals a quiet truth. Being rational doesn't always mean being consistent. Sometimes it means living with contradictions you can't resolve. And maybe the most honest sentence in any book is the one where the author admits they might be wrong. Skolem's Paradox. Imagine someone tells you there are infinite things inside a system that only contains countable things. Your first reaction might be confusion. How can something infinite be squeezed into something countable? Welcome to Skolem's Paradox, one of the most unsettling puzzles in mathematical logic. It begins with a simple idea: set theory. The foundation of modern mathematics allows for sets that are uncountably infinite, like the set of real numbers. There are so many of them you literally can't list them all, not even in theory. But here's where it gets strange. In 1922, Norwegian mathematician Thorolf Skolem proved something shocking. If set theory is consistent, then it must have a model, a way of interpreting it, where everything, even the uncountable sets, is countable from the perspective of that model. So now you're staring at a world that contains uncountable things, but only sees them as countable. It's like a universe that believes its ocean has no water, even as it's drowning in it. How is that even possible? It comes down to perspective. From outside the model, our point of view, we see that it contains uncountable sets, but from inside everything seems countable, because the language of the model doesn't include the tools to recognize uncountability. Skolem's paradox forces us to ask, what does it mean to exist if something exists but can't be recognized from within? And what does that say about our own reality? Could we, like the model, be blind to truths that exist just beyond our conceptual reach? Are we living in a logical system that limits our ability to comprehend infinity? Skolem's paradox doesn't just twist mathematics, it bends ontology, epistemology, and the very boundaries of truth, because sometimes what we cannot see might still be there, quiet, vast, and uncountable. Moore's paradox. Imagine someone calmly looking you in the eyes and saying, "It's raining, but I don't believe that it's raining." You'd probably feel a strange kind of mental dissonance because what they're saying sounds grammatically correct, but it doesn't make any logical sense. That's Moore's paradox. First identified by philosopher G.E. Moore in the 1940s. It's not a contradiction in logic, but a contradiction between what's being said and what's being believed. In simple terms, you can't truthfully say something that you also claim not to believe. For example, the Earth is round, but I don't believe the Earth is round. Or you're in danger, but I don't believe you are. Your brain short-circuits. You feel like something's broken, but grammatically it isn't. This paradox lives in a strange space between language, belief, and self-awareness, and it reveals just how fragile our sense of truth really is. Here's why it matters. When you say something out loud, you're not just stating facts, you're revealing what you believe to be true. So when your words and your beliefs don't align, you create a kind of psychological glitch. It's not a lie. It's not an error in syntax, it's a deeper paradox where your own mind is at odds with itself. Philosophers use Moore's paradox to explore the boundaries of epistemology, the study of knowledge and belief, and in real life this paradox shows up more than you'd think. When people deny climate change while acknowledging rising temperatures, when someone says they love you but act like they don't believe it, when we say we have time but act like time is slipping away, Moore's paradox reminds us that contradiction doesn't just live in logic, it lives in us, in our words, in our hidden doubts. The Dichotomy Paradox. How do you ever get anywhere? Seriously, how do you move from one place to another, if you always have to cover half the distance first? This is the Dichotomy Paradox, first proposed by the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea around 2,500 years ago, and it's much more unsettling than it seems. Zeno argued that motion is impossible. Why? Because to reach your destination you must first go halfway. But before you can go halfway you must go a quarter, and before that an eighth, then a 16th, then a 32nd. It never ends. There will always be an infinite number of smaller distances to cross first. So if you have to complete an infinite number of tasks, how can you ever finish? In theory you're stuck. Motion is an illusion, but you know you move. You've walked, you've run, you've jumped. You've crossed rooms, streets, and cities. So what's going on? Zeno wasn't trying to deny reality. He was trying to show that our understanding of infinity was broken. In his time there was no calculus, no way to deal with infinite sums in a meaningful way. Mathematically, his paradox made sense because no one could prove it wrong. But now we can. You can slice the space into an infinite number of parts and still reach the end. But here's the twist. Even if we solved it mathematically, the paradox still feels real because it points to something deeper, that infinity exists not just beyond us but within the very act of movement. Zeno's dichotomy isn't just about motion, It's about the mystery of progress, and how every step forward might be crossing an infinite sea of impossibilities, and yet somehow we always arrive. The Sword and Shield Paradox. Imagine a merchant. He claims to sell the strongest shield, one that nothing can pierce, and beside it he advertises the sharpest sword, one that cuts through anything. So someone asks, what happens if you use your sword to strike your shield? He pauses and suddenly the logic collapses. This is the Sword and Shield Paradox, also known in ancient Chinese philosophy as Mao Dun, which literally means spear and shield, and more broadly, contradiction. It's one of the oldest known logical paradoxes, dating back over 2,000 years, and yet it remains incredibly relevant today. The paradox is simple but disturbing. If your sword can cut through anything, it must pierce the shield. But if the shield can block anything, it must stop the sword. Both can't be true at the same time. The moment you test one claim, the other fails. This isn't just a tale about weapons, it's a warning about self-contradiction, when two absolute claims cancel each other out. In logic, this paradox echoes in debates about irresistible forces meeting immovable objects, or in philosophy, where we explore the boundaries of language, belief, and even godlike power. Can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that they themselves cannot lift it? That's the same paradox in disguise. In science and technology, contradictions like this can stall progress when systems or definitions become incompatible with themselves. We run into it in AI alignment, ethical theory, and legal loopholes. The Sword and Shield Paradox reminds us that absolute claims are dangerous. They sound powerful, but taken together, they unravel reality. The Birthday Paradox. What are the odds that two people in a room share the same birthday? You might guess it's pretty low. Maybe 1 in 100. After all, there are 365 days in a year. It should take a large crowd to find a match, right? But here's the twist. In a group of just 23 people, there's about a 50% chance that 2 of them share a birthday. And with just 75 people, that probability jumps to 99%. This is the Birthday Paradox, a mathematical illusion that plays with your intuition. The paradox isn't really a paradox in the logical sense. It's a mismatch between how we expect probability to work and how it actually works. When we think about birthdays, we often compare ourselves to others. What's the chance someone shares a birthday with me? But that's not what the paradox is asking. It's asking, what's the chance that any 2 people in a group share a birthday? Those are very different questions. In a group of 23 people, there are 253 unique pairs of people. Each of those pairs has a 1 in 365 chance of matching birthdays. So the more people you add, the more pairs you create, and the faster the probability of a shared birthday skyrockets. It's exponential, not linear. This paradox has real-world applications too, from cryptography and hashing algorithms to security vulnerabilities. In fact, it forms the basis of the birthday attack in cybersecurity, which exploits the probability of hash collisions in digital systems. But beyond the math, the birthday paradox shows us how our minds aren't wired for true randomness. We underestimate how often coincidences should happen, and when they do, they feel meaningful, even if they're not. Hilbert's Grand Hotel Paradox. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, and every single room is already occupied, no vacancies. Now here comes a new guest. In any ordinary hotel that would be a problem, but not at Hilbert's Grand Hotel. Here, infinity plays by its own rules. This paradox, imagined by German mathematician David Hilbert, is one of the strangest thought experiments in all of math. It shows how infinity isn't just a big number, it's a completely different kind of reality. So how does the hotel handle the new guest? Easy. You move the person in room 1 to room 2, the person in room 2 to room 3, and so on. Now room 1 is free. Even though the hotel was full, it somehow makes room, and you can do this forever. In fact, an infinite number of new guests could arrive, and you could still make space. Just move each current guest from room N to room 2N. All the odd-numbered rooms are now free for the newcomers. Sounds impossible, right? But mathematically it's flawless. This paradox forces us to rethink everything we assume about space, logic, and limits. Infinite sets behave in ways that completely defy our everyday understanding. Hilbert's hotel isn't real, but it explains real things. It's used in cosmology, set theory, and even in debates about whether the universe had a beginning or has always existed. It shows us that some questions don't break the rules, they just operate under rules we haven't yet understood. The hotel is a metaphor for how logic can stretch and how infinity is less like a number and more like a mirror reflecting endless possibility. And when you truly grasp that, you realize how much of the universe might be just out of sight, hidden behind doors we didn't think we could open. The Elevator Paradox. Imagine you're in a building with dozens of floors. You press the button, wait, and when the elevator finally opens, it's always going down. Why does it feel like elevators are always going the wrong way? This strange sensation isn't just in your head. It's part of what's known as the elevator paradox, a statistical illusion that messes with your sense of reality. At its heart, the elevator paradox is about observation bias. If you're in a building and waiting on a random floor, it often seems like more elevators pass by going down than up. But mathematically, in most real-world systems, elevators are just as likely to be traveling up as they are to be traveling down. So what's causing this imbalance in perception? Well, let's take a tall office building during rush hour. People tend to enter the building in the morning and go up to work. In the evening they leave and go down. But in between, especially during busy times, elevators travel more frequently from the upper floors to the lower ones. That's where more calls are being made. And since most people are located on mid to lower floors, the probability of encountering a downward moving elevator increases. It's not the elevators that are biased, it's the sample you're exposed to. This is similar to the friendship paradox. Just like your friends seem to have more friends than you, elevators seem to go down more than up, because you're more likely to notice the ones that fit the illusion. The elevator paradox reveals how our personal experiences don't always match reality. They're shaped by our position in the system, our vantage point. It's a quiet lesson in perception, one that shows up in places as mundane as an elevator shaft. The I know that I know nothing paradox. What if the wisest thing you could ever say is that you know nothing at all? This isn't just modesty. This is a paradox at the heart of knowledge itself, one that has echoed across time from the mouth of one of history's greatest thinkers. Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, once said, "I know that I know nothing." On the surface it sounds humble, but dig deeper, and it becomes something much stranger. If you know that you know nothing, doesn't that mean you know something? And if you know something, then you don't know nothing. It cancels itself out. Yet it also reveals something profound. This paradox is not about ignorance. It's about awareness. Most people assume they know more than they do. They're confident, certain, even when wrong. But Socrates wasn't like that. He recognized the limits of his knowledge, and in doing so, he knew more than those who falsely believed they understood everything. That's the twist. Knowing that you know nothing is a form of higher awareness, a kind of meta-knowledge, not about facts but about the boundaries of what you can truly grasp. In philosophy, this is called epistemic humility, an acknowledgement that your understanding is always partial, always incomplete, and strangely, that makes you more accurate, not less. Socrates' paradox isn't about being empty-headed, it's about creating space for curiosity, for doubt, for learning without ego. It invites you to live in the question, not rush for the answer. And in a world full of noise and certainty, that quiet voice, the one that says "I don't know," might be the wisest of all. The temperature paradox. How hot is hot? Seems like a simple question. You check a thermometer and it gives you a number. But the truth is, the deeper you look into temperature, the more it begins to unravel. Welcome to the temperature paradox, a strange contradiction at the heart of thermodynamics. Temperature is supposed to be a measure of how fast particles are moving. More motion, more heat, less motion, colder. Simple. But here's the twist. In certain extreme conditions, adding energy to a system can lower its temperature, and taking energy away can make it hotter. Sounds impossible, but it happens, especially in systems with negative temperatures. You heard that right, negative absolute temperatures. In classical physics, the coldest possible temperature is absolute zero, where all particle motion stops. You can't go colder than that. But in some quantum systems like lasers or supercooled atoms, scientists can create states that behave as if they have a temperature below absolute zero. But these systems aren't colder than cold, they're actually hotter than infinity, because in thermodynamics, negative temperature doesn't mean very cold, it means inverted behavior. In normal systems, particles prefer lower energy states, but in these strange systems, particles prefer higher energy states, stacking up at the top. So if you bring a normal system into contact with a negative temperature one, heat flows from the negative temperature system into the positive one, backward heat, and that's the paradox. Our intuitive understanding of temperature as a straight line from cold to hot breaks down at the quantum level. Temperature isn't just how warm something feels, it's about how energy is distributed, and in some systems, even that simple rule bends. The temperature paradox shows that even the things we take most for granted, warmth, cold, motion, can flip on their heads with just the right conditions. Reality isn't just weirder than we think, it's weirder than we can think, and from that warmth we move inward, into a place of total mental stillness. the intentionally blank page paradox. Picture this. You're flipping through a manual, a test booklet, or a legal document, and then suddenly you see it. This page intentionally left blank, and for a second, your brain freezes. If the page is truly blank, why say anything at all? But if you print those words, then the page isn't blank anymore. It's a page with text telling you it's blank, which makes the statement false. And yet without those words, you might think something was missing, a misprint, an error, a gap. This is the intentionally blank page paradox, a quiet contradiction that sneaks up in the most mundane corners of life. At its core, this paradox is about meta-information, information about information. When you say this page is blank, you're communicating about the state of the page, but the very act of communicating destroys the condition you're describing. It's like walking into a room and shouting, "No one is speaking." Your voice defeats the message. The intentionally blank page tries to reassure us, to tell us there's nothing to see here, but it does so by adding something to see. This strange loop has deeper philosophical implications. It touches on the limits of self-reference. When a system describes itself in a way that breaks its own rules, it's similar to the liar paradox. This sentence is false, or the Barber Paradox. The barber shaves everyone who doesn't shave themselves. These statements twist inward on themselves, creating contradictions that can't be resolved cleanly. The intentionally blank page doesn't yell, it doesn't bend time or break physics, but it quietly unsettles the logic we take for granted, just by existing and contradicting itself in a single breath. Sometimes the most powerful paradoxes don't come wrapped in science fiction or ancient philosophy, but printed neatly on office paper. The Observer's Paradox. Have you ever noticed how simply watching something changes it? Not just in theory, but in reality. The observer's paradox is the unsettling idea that the act of observing a system, especially in human behavior or physics, can fundamentally alter what you're trying to observe. In its social form, it's simple. Ask someone how often they check their phone, and suddenly they check it less. Monitor a classroom, and the students behave differently. Record a conversation, and the words shift. You can never fully observe something naturally because your observation becomes part of the environment. But this paradox gets far stranger when you step into quantum physics. At the quantum level, particles like electrons or photons don't have definite positions or velocities. They exist in a cloud of probabilities until someone observes them. This is known as wave function collapse. The moment we look, measure, or interact, the particle chooses a position. Before that, it's not somewhere, it's everywhere, and nowhere at once. This phenomenon is famously illustrated in the double-slit experiment. Particles fired at a barrier with two slits behave like waves, interfering with themselves, creating a pattern of possibilities. But when we place a detector to see which slit the particle goes through, the wave collapses. It behaves like a solid particle again, just watching it changes its path. This paradox forces us to ask, is reality dependent on us? Are we just observers, or are we co-creators? The more closely we try to understand the truth, the more our presence reshapes it. What does that mean for science, for consciousness, for you? The observer's paradox whispers a chilling truth, that objectivity might be an illusion, and that reality, in its rawest form, only exists when we're not looking. So maybe some mysteries are clearest only when left unseen. The billiard ball paradox. Imagine this: you roll a billiard ball into a wormhole, a tunnel through space and time, and it travels back in time by 5 seconds. But just as it emerges from the other side, the past version of the ball is rolling toward the wormhole again. Only this time, the future ball knocks it off course, preventing it from ever entering the wormhole in the first place. But if the original ball never entered the wormhole, then how did the future ball get there? And if the future ball didn't exist, what knocked the original ball off course? This is the billiard ball paradox, a brain-breaking thought experiment in theoretical physics designed to test the logic of closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that loop back on themselves. The paradox reveals the fragile structure of cause and effect when time travel enters the equation. Because here's the haunting truth. If something from the future can interfere with its own past, can cause even exist in a world like that? Some physicists have tried to resolve it by invoking self-consistency, the idea that only timelines without contradictions can exist. So maybe the future ball always nudges the original one, just enough to still enter the wormhole, preserving the loop in a delicate cosmic dance. But others argue that time travel into the past makes any consistent universe impossible. It invites paradoxes that logic alone can't clean up. What starts as a simple game of billiards spirals into a philosophical black hole. Can you change the past? Can you touch your own timeline without unmaking yourself? The billiard ball paradox doesn't just question physics, it questions reality's grip on itself. It dares to imagine a universe where cause bends to effect and the future casually rewrites the past. Time in this world is no longer a line, but a loop that might never close. Peto's Paradox. Why don't whales get cancer more often? Think about it. A blue whale has hundreds of times more cells than a human. More cells mean more chances for something to go wrong. So by all logic, whales, elephants and other large animals should be riddled with tumors, but they're not. In fact, they seem less likely to get cancer than humans. That contradiction is called Peto's Paradox, named after epidemiologist Richard Peto, who first noticed the strange pattern in the 1970s. It defies what we expect from basic biology. Cancer happens when cells divide uncontrollably, and every time a cell divides there's a chance for a mutation, a typo in the genetic code. So more cells and more time should equal more chances for cancer. But whales live for decades, they're giants, they have trillions of cells, so why aren't they constantly battling tumors? The answer might lie in evolution. Large animals have developed extra layers of protection against cancer, more tumor-suppressing genes, more efficient DNA repair systems, and better control mechanisms to catch a rogue cell before it spreads. Elephants, for example, have multiple copies of a crucial gene called P53, which helps kill damaged cells before they become dangerous. Humans only have one copy. Elephants have 20. But here's where it gets eerie. If nature figured out how to beat cancer, why haven't we? Why hasn't evolution given us the same tools? Peto's paradox isn't just a medical curiosity. It's a window into something deeper. Maybe the things we think are inevitable, aging, disease, decay, aren't universal. Maybe nature already solved the problem and we're just catching up. This paradox asks us to reimagine the rules we think biology has written in stone. What if the solutions are already out there, just hidden in the bones of something much, much bigger? The Pinocchio Paradox. What happens when a lie tells the truth? Imagine this: Pinocchio looks you in the eye and says, "My nose will grow now." Not "I just stole something," or "I'm not lying," but a prediction, a statement about itself. And now we're stuck, because if his nose does grow, then he must have been telling the truth, which means it shouldn't have grown, since it only grows when he lies. But if it doesn't grow, then he must have been lying, which means it should have grown. No matter which way you turn it, the sentence collapses on itself. His nose growing invalidates the lie. His nose not growing proves the lie. It's a paradox in the simplest form, a child's tale unraveling logic itself. The Pinocchio Paradox is a playful cousin of the liar paradox, the classic riddle where someone says, "This sentence is false," but here it's embodied, it becomes physical. His nose doesn't just represent truth or falsehood, it responds to it, and by trying to predict its own behavior, it spins into a self-referential loop that has no consistent resolution. This tiny sentence, "My nose will grow now," invokes one of the deepest problems in logic. What happens when a rule refers to itself? Can truth survive the feedback loop? Some philosophers argue this is a harmless riddle. Others say it reveals the limits of any logical system that tries to fully explain itself. Even more unsettling, the paradox only works because we understand what Pinocchio is. A fictional character, yes, but one governed by a magical, consistent law. His nose grows when he lies, and somehow even that fairy tale law breaks down under the pressure of self-reference. It's a reminder that even our simplest rules can collapse under complexity, especially when the rule becomes aware of itself. The Boltzmann brain paradox. What if everything you see, the stars, the earth, your friends, your memories, isn't real? What if it's all just a random blip in the void? This is the Boltzmann brain paradox, and it's one of the most unsettling ideas in physics. It starts with a simple question: why does the universe exist in such an ordered low-entropy state when disorder is so much more probable? Ludwig Boltzmann, a 19th-century physicist, tried to answer that. He suggested that given enough time, even in a chaotic universe, order could spontaneously appear. Random fluctuations in a sea of chaos could, just by chance, create a tiny pocket of order, like a galaxy, or a solar system, or even a brain. And here's where things get weird. It would be far more likely for one self-aware brain to appear randomly in the void, complete with false memories and a vivid hallucination of reality, than for an entire universe like ours to form the way we think it did. In other words, you might not be a person in a real world. You might be a Boltzmann brain, a flicker of consciousness that appeared out of nowhere, with a lifetime of fake memories hardwired in from the start, and the moment you're aware of that thought, you vanish, because the odds say you shouldn't last more than a second. This paradox doesn't just challenge physics, it erodes the very foundation of what we call reality. It asks, how do you know you're not dreaming, if the dream feels exactly like waking life? The Boltzmann brain paradox isn't saying this is true, but it forces science to confront a terrifying possibility that the most likely explanation for your experience is also the least comforting one, and yet the fact you're still here might be proof that you're not just a glitch, or maybe you'll blink and never have existed at all. The paradox of hedonism. Have you ever tried to be happy, and the more you focused on it, the more it slipped away? This is the paradox of hedonism. The strange truth that the direct pursuit of pleasure often leads to disappointment, frustration, or even suffering. It sounds backwards. After all, isn't that what we're taught to do? Chase what feels good, avoid what doesn't. But the moment you make happiness your goal, you start measuring it. Am I happy yet? Why not? What's missing? This constant self-checking creates anxiety, a loop where joy becomes a target, and the more you aim, the harder it is to hit. Philosopher John Stuart Mill said it clearly, ask yourself whether you are happy, and you cease to be so. Why? Because happiness, like sleep or falling in love, is a side effect, not something you can force. You don't find joy by gripping it tightly, you find it when you're immersed in creativity, in curiosity, in connection. Think about when you've laughed uncontrollably, got lost in a book, or walked for hours without checking the time. You weren't chasing happiness, you were living, and happiness came quietly along for the ride. The paradox of hedonism challenges the way we build our lives. It asks, what if trying to feel good is actually what's making you feel bad? It's not saying you should avoid joy, it's saying joy doesn't like to be hunted. Focus on meaning, focus on growth, focus on others. And happiness may visit, but never on command. And when it does, you might not even notice it at first, because in that moment you're not thinking about being happy, you simply are. The Catch-22 Paradox. You need experience to get the job, but you need the job to get experience. Sound familiar? This is the heart of a catch-22, a no-win situation where the conditions for success cancel each other out. But the term catch-22 has a deeper, darker origin. It comes from Joseph Heller's 1961 novel, where a dull bomber pilot wants to stop flying missions because he's terrified and doesn't want to die. The rule is simple. If you're insane, you don't have to fly. But if you ask not to fly, that proves you're sane, because only a sane person would fear death. So by trying to escape the rule, you confirm you're still trapped inside it. That's catch-22. You're stuck because any action you take to escape automatically invalidates your reason for escape. It's a self-sealing logic trap, and once you see it, you'll notice it everywhere. To get credit, you need trust. To get trust, you need credit. To get help, you must admit you're in trouble. But if you're in trouble, you might be seen as unfit to be helped. Even happiness can be a catch-22. The harder you try to feel good, the more aware you become that you aren't. Catch-22s live in legal systems, in bureaucracy, in job interviews, in dating, in therapy, in war and peace and paperwork. They expose the cruelty of circular logic, how rules can be designed to prevent escape. No matter what you do, you're free to go, as long as you don't ask to leave. The Catch-22 paradox reveals how logic, when bent just slightly, can trap people in loops with no exit. And that's what makes it so eerie. It's not a glitch in a system, it is the system. And just when you think you've found a way out, the rules quietly rearrange themselves to close the door again. The Arrow Paradox. Imagine an arrow flying through the air. Graceful, fast, cutting across space. But now, freeze time. Pause the universe for just a single moment. In that frozen instant, where is the arrow? It's suspended, motionless. It isn't moving. In that slice of time, it has no speed. It's just there. Now imagine the next instant, and the next, and the next. In each of these frozen frames, the arrow is perfectly still, so how then does it move at all? This is the Arrow Paradox, posed by the ancient philosopher Zeno. He argued that if time is made of indivisible moments like frames in a movie, then motion is an illusion, because in each frame nothing is changing, and if nothing changes in any frame, how does change happen between them? Think about a film reel. Each frame is still, but run them fast enough, and it creates the illusion of motion. Is that all your life is? A sequence of still moments, stitched together by perception? Modern physics offers answers. Motion, we say, is real. We define velocity as change over time, and yet Zeno's point still stings. If reality is broken into discrete instants, where is the movement living? Does it exist in the spaces between moments? Do we move in time, or does time move us? Zeno's arrow reminds us that even our most basic experiences, like motion, can unravel under close inspection, and if motion is an illusion, what else might be? This paradox doesn't just apply to arrows, it applies to you, to your breath, to your choices, to the flow of time you feel every second. Are you moving through life, or just flickering across a series of frozen frames? And as you let that idea settle in, we're about to unravel another layer of this ancient confusion, the paradox of place. Where are you right now? Not just your city, not your room. Where is that room? In a building? On a planet? In a galaxy? Inside what? And here's where it gets strange. Everything that exists seems to be in something. Your phone is on a table, the table is in a room, the room is in a house, the house is on Earth, Earth is in space. But then, where is space? Welcome to the paradox of place, a question so simple, it loops the mind into infinity. If everything has to be located somewhere, then shouldn't space itself be inside something else? And if that something else exists, where is that? You can't stop the loop. No matter how far out you zoom, you're still asking where. Some ancient philosophers like Aristotle believed that everything had a natural place, but they quickly ran into the same problem. What is the place of all places? Modern physics tries to solve it. Einstein showed that space isn't just a container, it's a fabric. It bends, it stretches, it even has holes. But still, the question echoes. What is this fabric inside of? If the universe is expanding, what is it expanding into? Maybe the paradox of place isn't about geography. Maybe it's about perspective. We crave edges, boundaries, walls, but the cosmos might not offer any. Maybe there is no outside, just layers of in, forever. This paradox reminds us that even our most basic assumptions, like everything has a location, might not hold up under deep thought. Where are we? Maybe the better question is, can we ever know? And just when your sense of space begins to dissolve, our next paradox turns to motion itself and asks if moving is even possible. The paradox of free will. What if every choice you've ever made, every yes, every no, every turning point was never really a choice at all? Pause on that for a second, because the paradox of free will cuts deep into who we think we are. On one hand, you feel it every day, you decide what to eat, what to say, what to do. It feels like you're steering the ship. But science and philosophy tell a different story. Neuroscience has found that your brain often decides before you become aware of the decision. In lab studies, the part of your brain responsible for action activates milliseconds before you consciously choose. Your mind follows the choice, not leads it. So if your brain is acting before your awareness, who's really in control? Then there's determinism, the idea that everything that happens is caused by what came before it. From the Big Bang to your breakfast, every thought, every action, just dominoes falling in perfect order. But here's the twist. If everything is determined, you never truly choose. And if nothing is determined, then actions are random. Neither feels like freedom. This is the paradox. True free will seems impossible in both a determined and random universe. Either your choices are caused, which means they're not free, or they're uncaused, which means they're not yours. So what are we? Agents of choice? Or passengers on a track pretending to hold the wheel? This paradox doesn't just live in philosophy books. It lingers in every regret, every moment you wish you could go back and choose differently. But maybe, instead of breaking our sense of self, this paradox invites us to look deeper, to question how we define freedom, and how we live with the choices we make, whether they were ours or not. Newcomb's Paradox. Imagine this. You walk into a room. On the table, there are two boxes. Box A is transparent. It always contains $1,000. Box B is opaque. It either contains 1 million or nothing. You can choose to take both boxes or only box B. But here's the twist. A super-intelligent predictor, almost always accurate, has already predicted what you'll do. If it predicted you'll take only box B, it put $1 million inside. If it predicted you'll take both boxes, it left box B empty. Now the choice is yours. Take both or just B. Your gut says take both. Box A has a guaranteed 1,000. If B has the million, you still get it. If not, at least you don't walk away empty-handed. But wait, if the predictor is truly accurate, then your choice now was already predicted then. So if you take both boxes, the predictor almost certainly left box B empty. You'll get $1,000. But if you commit to only taking box B, you're likely to walk away with $1 million. This is Newcomb's paradox, a mind-melting thought experiment that questions free will, determinism, and decision theory. It pits two ideas against each other: causal reasoning, what's in the box is already decided, and evidential reasoning, your choice reflects what was predicted. One says, it's already done. The other says, what I choose tells me what likely happened. So what's the rational move? Take both, or trust the predictor? There's no easy answer. Newcomb's paradox splits philosophers, scientists, and economists. Some say go for both, others say take just B. Each side claims the other is irrational, but maybe the real lesson here is how strange the world becomes when we mix knowledge of the future with the illusion of free will. Temporal Paradox. What if you received a letter from yourself, but it was postmarked 50 years in the future, and inside it said, don't get on the train tomorrow. You don't know why, you don't remember writing it, but you know it's in your handwriting, you know it's you, and now you face a choice: follow the warning or ignore it. This is the unsettling core of the temporal paradox. When cause and effect get tangled in time, in everyday life the past causes the present, and the present shapes the future. Simple, linear, predictable. But when time loops or folds back on itself, like in science fiction or certain interpretations of physics, things start to get strange. Imagine you go back in time and give your younger self a book you wrote in the future. Your younger self reads it, grows up, and writes the same book. But where did the original idea come from? This is called a causal loop. The book exists, but it has no origin, no starting point. It just circulates, endlessly. And here's where the paradox hits hardest. If the future can influence the past, then can you truly make choices? Or is every decision just the echo of something already set in motion? Physicists have explored this too. Some solutions to general relativity allow for closed time-like curves, mathematical models where time loops back on itself. But if these loops are real, they could break causality, create paradoxes, and destabilize everything we think we know. The temporal paradox asks us to reconsider the flow of time itself. Is the future fixed? Can the past be changed? Or are we all caught in a strange loop where cause and effect are illusions? Time isn't just a line, it might be a maze. The Omnipotence Paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a rock so heavy that even they cannot lift it? If yes, then there's something they can't do: lift the rock. If no, then there's still something they can't do: create the rock. Either way, it seems that being truly all-powerful is logically impossible. This is the Omnipotence Paradox, a question that quietly shatters the very idea of unlimited power. At first, it sounds like a trick, a linguistic knot. But it's deeper than wordplay. It cuts into the heart of theology, logic, and metaphysics. Because if you define omnipotence as the power to do anything, you must also include the power to contradict logic itself. But can logic be broken? Can one be all-powerful and yet be bound by the rules of reason? Some philosophers have tried to solve this. They redefine omnipotence as the ability to do anything that's logically possible. But then the paradox still stands as a limit. It shows that logic, not power, sets the boundaries of reality. Others argue that true power lies not in contradiction, but in coherence. An all-powerful being would never need to create such a rock because the very act of doing so would be meaningless, like drawing a square circle or making 2 + 2 = 5. The paradox reveals something unsettling. That power has edges, and those edges are shaped not by strength but by structure. We like to imagine gods, minds, or even future AI as infinitely capable. But this question reminds us that even the infinite may be governed by something deeper than force. The quiet authority of logic itself. The Raven Paradox. Imagine this. You see a black raven in the forest, then another, and another. You start to believe the rule, all ravens are black, and the more black ravens you see, the more confident you become. Now here's the twist. You walk into a kitchen and see a green apple. Somehow you've just gathered more evidence that all ravens are black. How? This is the Raven Paradox, and it's one of the strangest thought experiments in logic. It starts with a simple principle. When a general statement is true, so is its contrapositive. So if all ravens are black is true, then it must also be true that everything that is not black is not a raven. That means every non-black non-raven is technically supporting evidence for the claim. So a green apple, a red chair, a blue car, they all in theory help confirm that ravens don't come in other colors. But that feels wrong. How can a fruit tell you anything useful about a bird? And that's exactly the problem. The Raven Paradox reveals the weirdness of how we gather and interpret evidence. Technically, the logic holds, but intuitively, it doesn't. It shows how statistical reasoning and logic can clash with common sense. In theory, every observation supports or weakens a claim, but in practice, we give more weight to things that feel relevant. A black raven tells us more than a green apple ever could, even if both count as evidence. This paradox reminds us that confirmation isn't always about logic alone. It's about perceived relevance, context, and the human tendency to connect dots where they feel most convincing. Russell's Paradox. Imagine a barber who shaves everyone in town who doesn't shave themselves. One day, someone asks, does the barber shave himself? At first it seems like a silly riddle, but this question shattered the foundation of mathematics, because if the barber shaves himself, he shouldn't, because he only shaves people who don't. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he must, because he shaves everyone who doesn't. Either way, you fall into a contradiction. This is the core of Russell's paradox, posed by philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell in 1901. But he wasn't talking about barbers. He was talking about sets, the basic building blocks of mathematics. He asked, what if we define a set as the set of all sets that do not contain themselves? Then ask, does this set contain itself? If it does, then by definition it shouldn't. But if it doesn't, then it fits the definition, so it should. Just like the barber, the set twists in on itself, creating a logical loop with no way out. This wasn't just a philosophical joke, it exposed a fatal flaw in the very logic math was built on. Before Russell, many believed all sets were well-behaved, tidy collections of objects that could be defined freely, but Russell's paradox proved that some definitions implode the moment you look at them too closely. It forced mathematicians to rebuild set theory from the ground up, introducing new rules, boundaries, and entire systems to avoid falling into contradictions. This paradox teaches us something profound. Even the most seemingly solid systems can hide hidden traps beneath their surface. Logic, like language, can sometimes tie itself in knots, and when it does, it can bring everything built on it tumbling down. The unexpected hanging paradox. A judge tells a prisoner, "You will be hanged at noon on one weekday next week, but the execution will be a surprise. You won't know the day until the executioner shows up at your cell." The prisoner thinks carefully. If the hanging hasn't happened by Thursday night, then it must happen on Friday. But if he knows that, then it won't be a surprise, so it can't happen on Friday. Now that Friday's ruled out, the same logic applies to Thursday, because if Friday is impossible, then Thursday becomes the last possible day, and that would no longer be a surprise either. He continues backward, eliminating every day, Wednesday, Tuesday, even Monday. In the end, he concludes the execution can't happen at all. But then one morning, without warning, the guard walks in. The prisoner is stunned, and the hanging is carried out, completely unexpected. This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a riddle about logic, prediction, and the limits of reasoning. On the surface, the prisoner's logic seems airtight, but the surprise still happens. So where did he go wrong? The paradox exposes a strange gap between knowing and expecting. The prisoner assumes that logical deduction can outsmart uncertainty, but in doing so he creates a false sense of control, and that's what makes this paradox so disturbing. It shows how trying too hard to predict something can actually make you more vulnerable to it. We do this in real life. We try to prepare for every possibility, to reason our way out of fear, but some outcomes remain unpredictable because they depend on the very act of prediction itself. The unexpected hanging paradox is a quiet warning that not everything can be known in advance. Some surprises must remain surprises to be real. The paradox of tolerance. What if being endlessly tolerant eventually destroys tolerance itself? This is the paradox of tolerance, a disturbing idea proposed by philosopher Karl Popper, and it challenges one of the most celebrated values in modern society, freedom of expression. We often believe that a truly open society should tolerate all ideas, even the extreme ones, even the hateful ones, even the ones that reject tolerance itself. But here's the problem: if a society tolerates intolerance, the intolerant can rise, gain power, and eventually destroy that tolerant society from within. So the paradox is this: to preserve tolerance, you must be willing to not tolerate the intolerant. It sounds backward, it feels uncomfortable, but it might be necessary. Because when hate speech is allowed to spread, when oppressive ideologies are given endless room to grow, they often don't stop at speech. They turn into action, into laws, into violence, into control. And when they take over, tolerance is no longer an option. Popper wasn't arguing for censorship of every opposing view. He believed in debate, in reason, in education. But he warned, if you give every ideology a platform, even the ones that aim to destroy democracy, equality and freedom, you risk losing everything you stood for. So how do we draw the line? How do we decide which voices to silence? That's the hard part, because the paradox doesn't come with easy answers. Just a warning, too much openness can be fatal. The paradox of tolerance isn't about silencing difference, it's about protecting the space where difference can exist, and sometimes that means making difficult choices about who gets to speak and who doesn't. It's a reminder that even our highest values can turn against us if we don't defend them carefully. The Barber Paradox. Picture a small town, quiet, orderly. Every man is either clean-shaven or bearded, but none of them shaves themselves. Instead, there's one barber, and he follows one rule. He shaves all and only those men who do not shave themselves. Simple, right? Until you ask a strange but simple question, who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, then by definition, he must not shave himself. But if he doesn't shave himself, then by the same rule, he must shave himself. Either way, he ends up breaking the rule. This is the Barber Paradox, and it's one of the most famous logical contradictions ever proposed. On the surface, it seems like a quirky riddle, but beneath it lies a serious breakdown in how self-reference can twist logic into a loop. It was introduced by Bertrand Russell, one of the greatest philosophers and logicians of the 20th century, and it wasn't just about barbers, it was about mathematics, about sets, about the very foundations of logic. See, Russell discovered that if a set can contain itself, you can end up with contradictions just like the barber. He tried to define a set of all sets that do not contain themselves, and asked, does that set contain itself? The result is the same loop. If it does, it doesn't. If it doesn't, it does. The Barber Paradox is more than a clever story. It exposed cracks in the basic structure of logic and mathematics. Cracks that needed new systems to fix. In a way, this paradox is a mirror. It shows what happens when a rule tries to include itself, when definitions collapse inward. Self-reference, it turns out, is dangerous, not just in barbershops but in language, logic and thought itself. The twin paradox. Imagine you and your twin are born on the same day. You grow up together, side by side. Then one day your twin boards a spaceship and flies away near the speed of light. They explore distant galaxies while you stay on Earth waiting. Years pass, for you a lifetime, and then they return. But they haven't aged like you, not even close. They still look young, you are old. This is the twin paradox, a real consequence of Einstein's theory of special relativity. According to the theory, time slows down the faster you move, and when you approach the speed of light, time for you almost stops, relative to someone who stays still. So if your twin travels at light speed and comes back, only a few years might have passed for them, while decades passed for you. The paradox lies in the confusion. Shouldn't both twins see the other as moving? Shouldn't each think the other's clock is slower? But here's the twist. Only one of you experiences acceleration and deceleration. Only one changes direction, leaving one frame of reference for another. That breaks the symmetry. And so it's the traveling twin who actually experiences less time. It's not just theory. We've tested it. Astronauts on the International Space Station experience a tiny bit of time dilation compared to us on Earth. Their clocks tick just a little slower. The twin paradox forces us to rethink time, not as a constant, but as something flexible, dependent on speed and motion. Your age, your experience of time, your very existence is relative. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. It's not just science fiction, it's physics. And in a universe where time bends and stretches, the question becomes, what does aging even mean? And can you outrun time itself? The Bootstrap Paradox. Imagine you find a book. It's old, dusty, filled with complex theories. Something brilliant, something ahead of its time. You study it for years, you publish it, you become famous. Years later, someone travels back in time and hands you the very book you once found. You realize, it's the same one. But here's the problem. Who wrote it? This is the Bootstrap Paradox, a time loop where something exists without an origin, an object, idea, or even a person, is passed from the future to the past, and then from the past back to the future, in an endless circle. Its name comes from the phrase pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, doing something impossible on your own. In this paradox, information or objects seem to appear from nowhere. They were never invented, never created, they just exist, permanently trapped in a loop, causeless and eternal. Science fiction loves this idea. In one version, a time traveler gives Beethoven's sheet music to young Beethoven, who grows up and composes it, only for it to be taken back again to his younger self. So who composed the music, Beethoven, or no one at all? This paradox breaks our sense of cause and effect. Our minds are used to thinking in lines. This happens because of that. But time loops create circles, and in a circle there is no true beginning. The Bootstrap Paradox challenges how we define creation, authorship, and time itself. Can something exist purely by being passed around? If knowledge can loop, does it even need a source? It's not just fiction. In quantum physics, time may not be as linear as we think. Effects could precede causes. The past could be shaped by the future. The Bootstrap Paradox shows us how fragile our grip on logic becomes when time stops playing by the rules. The Fermi Paradox. Look up at the night sky. Thousands of stars, each possibly hosting planets, each planet possibly teeming with life. And yet it's silent. No signals, no sightings, no visitors knocking on our door. So physicist Enrico Fermi asked a chillingly simple question: where is everybody? This is the Fermi Paradox, the contradiction between high estimates of alien life and the complete lack of evidence for it. Space is huge. The Milky Way alone has over 100 billion stars. Even if a tiny fraction have planets like Earth, we should be surrounded by signs of life. Intelligent civilizations could colonize the galaxy in a few million years. So why don't we see megastructures or hear their signals? Why does the sky feel empty? Some scientists think we're too early. Maybe civilizations are rare, and we're among the first. Others believe we're too late. Civilizations rise, burn bright, then vanish. Nuclear war, climate collapse, rogue AI. Maybe life is good at starting but not at surviving. There's the zoo hypothesis. Maybe aliens are watching us but we're too primitive to notice, like ants trying to detect satellites. Some theories go darker. Maybe there's a reason the universe is quiet. Maybe something out there silences anyone who makes noise. A great filter waiting. Or maybe we really are alone. The Fermi Paradox forces us to stare into the void, not just of space, but of possibility. It asks whether humanity is rare, fragile, or doomed, and it reminds us that not all mysteries live on Earth. Some hang just beyond the atmosphere, silent, waiting, infinite. Zeno's paradoxes. What if movement was an illusion? Imagine this: you're watching a runner dash toward the finish line. They're fast, smooth, relentless, but according to a Greek philosopher named Zeno, they will never get there. Zeno's paradoxes are some of the oldest and strangest arguments in philosophy, and they're all designed to make you question something simple. Can anything actually move? His most famous idea is called the Dichotomy Paradox. It goes like this. Before the runner can reach the finish line, they must get halfway there. Then they must get halfway through the remaining distance. And again, and again. Each step is half the length of the last. But here's the catch. There are infinitely many halfway points. So how can the runner ever finish the race if there's always another fraction of space to cover? Zeno's paradox doesn't just mess with space, it stretches time too. Another version, called Achilles and the Tortoise, says that a fast runner can never catch a slow one if the slow runner has a head start. Why? Because by the time Achilles reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved a little farther ahead, and when Achilles reaches that new point, the tortoise is still ahead, just slightly. Repeat forever. Achilles is always chasing a ghost of where the tortoise used to be. Of course, in real life, runners move and races end, but Zeno's paradoxes dig at a deeper question. Is space infinitely divisible? Is time? Modern physics and calculus say yes, you can sum an infinite series and still get a finite result, but the paradox remains haunting, reminding us that even the simplest acts, like walking across a room, might hide an infinite regress beneath the surface. Zeno's paradoxes aren't about math problems, they're about the tension between what logic says and what experience shows, and sometimes they don't agree. The Monty Hall problem. You're on a game show. There are 3 doors. Behind one of them is a brand new car. Behind the other 2 goats. You pick a door, let's say door number 1. Then the host, who knows what's behind all the doors, opens one of the others, revealing a goat. Now he turns to you and asks, do you want to switch your choice? Your instinct might say, it doesn't matter, it's 50-50 now, but that's wrong. This is the Monty Hall problem, a paradox that messes with your intuition and has stumped people, including mathematicians, for decades. Here's the real answer: you should always switch. Because when you first choose, you have a 1 in 3 chance of picking the car. That means there's a 2 in 3 chance the car is behind one of the other 2 doors. When the host reveals a goat, he's giving you information. He's not choosing randomly, he's showing you a losing option on purpose. And that 2 in 3 probability doesn't just disappear, it collapses into the one unopened door you didn't pick. So by switching, you're not flipping a coin, You're trading a 1 in 3 chance for a 2 in 3 chance. But here's why this feels so wrong. Our brains aren't wired for conditional probability. We rely on intuition, not math. And this paradox exposes how fragile that intuition really is. It shows up in everyday decisions, from medical testing to poker games to financial forecasting. Understanding it isn't just about winning a car, it's about learning how evidence and choice interact. The Monty Hall problem reminds us that in a world of uncertainty, logic often whispers something different from what instinct screams. The liar paradox. What if someone looked you in the eye and said, "I'm lying"? Do you believe them? If they're telling the truth, then they're lying, which means they're not telling the truth. But if they're lying, then what they said is false, which means they're telling the truth. And just like that, you're trapped. This is the liar paradox, a self-referential statement that loops in on itself until truth and falsehood collapse. It might sound like a clever word game, but this tiny sentence breaks logic wide open. Philosophers have been wrestling with it for over 2,000 years, because it doesn't just bend language, it exposes a crack in the very structure of reason. The liar paradox forces us to ask, can a statement describe itself in a way that's consistent? And if it can't, what does that say about truth? There are many versions. This sentence is false, or everything I say is a lie. Even more complex ones exist in computer science, where systems crash when asked to evaluate statements about themselves. This paradox isn't just theoretical. Self-reference shows up in programming errors, artificial intelligence, and even in how we think about our own minds. When we reflect on ourselves, when we say "I know that I don't know," or "I can't trust my own thoughts," we enter the same kind of loop. The liar paradox doesn't give you an answer, it gives you a mirror that reflects itself forever. And it's a reminder that not all contradictions are mistakes. Some are built into the way we speak, the way we reason, the way we try to understand a world that may not always fit neatly into yes or no. The lottery paradox. Imagine you're holding a lottery ticket. Millions of people are playing, you know almost certainly that you're not going to win. But here's the twist, someone has to. This is the lottery paradox, a problem that quietly destroys how we think about belief and certainty. You believe your ticket won't win, so does everyone else. And statistically that belief is perfectly reasonable. But if you believe that every individual ticket will lose, then you're also believing that no one will win, which contradicts the very setup of the lottery. So where do you draw the line? Do you believe each ticket is a loser, or do you believe someone will win? You can't logically believe both, but that's exactly what most people do. The paradox reveals a gap between reasonable individual beliefs and reasonable collective belief. Just because it makes sense to doubt each ticket individually, doesn't mean it makes sense to doubt them all together. And that's where things get strange. This isn't just a numbers game. It's about how we form beliefs, how we justify them, and how logic can fracture when too many small certainties add up to a contradiction. The lottery paradox lives in the same space as trust, probability, and doubt. It shows up in legal systems, scientific studies, and everyday decisions. We often believe individual claims based on strong evidence but still reject the whole collection of claims because something feels off. It's a reminder that logic, while powerful, has limits, especially when we stretch it across large systems where probability whispers one thing and intuition screams another. The Sorites Paradox. How many grains of sand make a pile? 1. Probably not. 2. Still no. But what about 100, 1,000? This is the Sorites Paradox. A deceptively simple question that unravels how we define anything at all. The word Sorites comes from the Greek word for heap, and the paradox goes like this. If you take away 1 grain of sand from a heap, you still have a heap. But if you keep removing grains one by one, at what point does it stop being a heap? There's no clear answer. You never hit a sharp line, and that's what makes this so unsettling. The same logic works in reverse. If 1 grain isn't a heap, and adding 1 grain doesn't turn it into a heap, then no amount of adding grains should ever get you to a heap. But clearly, at some point, it is a heap. You just don't know where the change happens. This paradox shows how vague concepts break under scrutiny. It applies to more than just sand. When does a person go from young to old? At what moment do you fall out of love? How much change makes someone a different person? Our minds want clear borders, but reality offers us gradients. We live in the grey, and we draw lines that aren't really there. That's why the Sorites Paradox feels so subtle and so powerful. It doesn't hit you with contradiction. It gently pulls apart your sense of certainty. It makes you realize how much of life is built on definitions that shift beneath your feet. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some truths don't need a sharp edge. Maybe a heap is a feeling, not a number. The Grandfather Paradox. What if you could travel back in time? Not just to watch history, but to change it. Sounds exciting, until you ask one question. What happens if you go back and kill your own grandfather? This is the Grandfather Paradox, and it tears a hole in the idea of time travel, because if you succeed, if your grandfather dies before your parent is born, then you were never born, and if you were never born, then who went back in time? The paradox creates a loop that can't be untangled. Your actions in the past erase the conditions that made them possible. It's like pulling the floor out from under your own feet and still expecting to stand. Science fiction loves this concept. Movies, books, games, they all explore versions of it. Some invent branching timelines, others suggest the universe corrects the timeline to prevent contradictions from happening. But here's what makes the paradox unsettling. We're not just talking about killing a grandfather, we're talking about causality. The idea that events happen in a clear logical order, cause then effect, past then future. The Grandfather Paradox breaks that order. It makes time unstable, fluid, self-destructive. Some theories say time travel into the past is impossible, specifically because of paradoxes like this. Others say the past already includes your interference, meaning if you go back you already did. And whatever you tried to change was always part of what happened. But no one really knows, because if time is a loop, or a spiral, or a branching forest of infinite timelines, our minds may not be wired to fully grasp it. The Grandfather Paradox doesn't just question time travel, it questions fate, choice, and whether the past is truly untouchable. The Ship of Theseus. Imagine a ship sailing across the sea. It's old, legendary and admired by everyone who sees it. But over time, one by one, every single piece of wood on that ship is replaced. First the sails, then the planks, then the masts, until not a single original part remains. Now here's the question, is it still the same ship? This is the Ship of Theseus paradox, a 2,000-year-old thought experiment that asks, when does something stop being itself? Is identity tied to material, to memory, to continuity, or is it something else entirely? Some say yes, it's still the same ship, because the idea of the ship never changed. It sailed the same route, served the same purpose, carried the same legacy. Others say no, once every part is replaced, you're looking at a replica. The original is gone. What remains is just the illusion of sameness. But then it gets trickier. What if someone gathered all the old, discarded parts and rebuilt them into a second ship? Now which one is the real Ship of Theseus? The one with the story, or the one with the original parts? Can both be real? Can neither? This paradox isn't just about boats, it's about you. Your body replaces cells constantly. Your thoughts evolve. Your memories shift. Are you the same person you were 5 years ago, or 10? If everything inside you changes, what stays the same? The Ship of Theseus forces us to confront the blurry line between change and identity, between continuity and replacement, and maybe the most haunting part of all, it suggests that identity might not be a thing we have, but a story we tell. The paradox of value. Here's a question that sounds simple, until you try to answer it. Why is water which keeps you alive cheap, while diamonds which serve almost no real purpose cost a fortune? This is called the paradox of value, also known as the diamond-water paradox, and for centuries it left even the smartest minds confused. You can live your whole life without touching a single diamond, but go 3 days without water, and you're done. So why does one sparkle in jewelry stores while the other pours freely from your sink? Even Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, struggled with this. He knew water was more useful, but in the marketplace diamonds ruled, and he couldn't fully explain why. The answer lies in 2 ideas, total utility and marginal utility. Total utility is the overall usefulness of something. Clearly water wins, but marginal utility is different. It's how valuable the next unit of something is to you. Water is everywhere. We take showers in it, water our plants with it, waste it without thinking, so getting one more bottle of water doesn't feel special. Its marginal utility is low. Diamonds, though, are rare. You don't just stumble upon them in the street, so even one more diamond feels incredibly valuable. Its marginal utility is high, and that's what markets care about. Not how important something is to life, but how rare it is, how much someone is willing to pay for just one more. This paradox doesn't just expose economic logic, it reveals something deeper about us. We don't always value what matters. We value what shines, what's hard to find, what others desire. We turn air into nothing, and diamonds into status. So ask yourself, what are you overlooking right now, simply because it's always been there? The Friendship Paradox. Here's something strange. Statistically, your friends probably have more friends than you do. And no, this isn't a personal dig. It's a real, proven mathematical phenomenon. It's called the Friendship Paradox. And once you understand it, it'll change how you see yourself and everyone around you. At first it sounds like a mistake. How can most people have fewer friends than their own friends? Isn't that impossible? But it's not a mistake, it's math. And it reveals something quietly unsettling about the way we experience connection. Here's how it works. Imagine a small network of people. Some have lots of friends, some have only a few. The people with lots of friends naturally show up more often on other people's friend lists. So when you average how many friends your friends have, the people who are well connected skew that average upward. The result? Most people feel like their friends are more connected than they are. And this doesn't just apply to friendships. Your co-workers probably seem to work more than you. Your classmates seem smarter. Your neighbors seem richer. But it's not that you're falling behind. It's that your point of view is distorted by the structure of the network itself. You're seeing the most visible people the most often, and naturally you compare yourself to them, but they aren't the average. They're just the loudest signals in the system. This paradox reveals something deeply human. We measure our worth by comparing ourselves to others, but we forget that our perspective is biased from the start. So next time you feel like everyone's doing better than you, pause, take a breath. Remember, you're standing in the middle of a web where the brightest nodes shine the hardest, but that doesn't mean they're the only ones that matter. You are not less than. You're just looking out from a place where everything appears brighter somewhere else. The answer paradox. What if getting the answer only raises more questions? The answer paradox is the unsettling idea that every time we solve a mystery, we don't reach the end, we just uncover a deeper layer. It's like pulling a thread, hoping to tidy the fabric, but instead unraveling the whole thing. You ask, what is the universe made of? And you get an answer, atoms. You ask, what are atoms made of? Quarks. You ask, what holds quarks together? And suddenly, you're buried in quantum fields, string theory, dark matter. With every answer, the horizon moves. And that's the paradox. Answers don't satisfy, they multiply. They seem to resolve things, but really they just give you better questions to ask. Think about how children ask why. You give a clear answer. They follow it with another why, and then another. Eventually, even the smartest adult hits a wall, not because they're out of facts, but because every answer is part of a longer chain. It's as if the universe was never meant to be fully understood, just explored, one question at a time. Some philosophers think this is built into reality itself. That knowledge is infinite, and humans being finite will always be chasing it like a mirage. Others say that seeking answers is where meaning comes from, that the paradox isn't a flaw, but a feature of being conscious. The answer paradox reminds us that the search is the destination. There is no final answer, no curtain to pull back where everything suddenly makes sense. And maybe that's okay. Maybe life isn't about closing loops, but learning how to live with open ones. The black hole information paradox. What happens to information when it falls into a black hole? Not the kind of information on your phone, but the fundamental data that describes matter itself. Your atoms, your thoughts, your life story. In physics, all of that is information. And black holes don't play fair. According to Einstein's general relativity, black holes are cosmic traps. Once you pass the event horizon, the point of no return, nothing can escape, not even light. You're gone. But quantum physics says something else. It tells us that information can't be destroyed ever. No matter what happens, the universe is supposed to keep the books balanced. So here's the paradox. If something falls into a black hole, does its information vanish forever? If so, that violates quantum mechanics. But if the information escapes, how? Stephen Hawking made things worse or better, depending on how you look at it. In the 1970s, he showed that black holes aren't entirely black. They emit tiny amounts of radiation, now known as Hawking radiation, and over time this causes black holes to slowly evaporate. But Hawking radiation is featureless. It carries no imprint of what fell in. It's random. So if a black hole eventually evaporates and all that remains is empty space and meaningless radiation, then where did the information go? Was it erased, or somehow scrambled into the radiation? Or is it still somewhere? This paradox sits at the collision point of quantum mechanics and general relativity, the two great theories of modern physics, and they're not agreeing. Some think the information gets encoded on the event horizon itself, like a cosmic hologram. Others believe the universe finds a loophole we haven't discovered yet, but for now no one knows. The black hole information paradox isn't just about science, it's about reality's deepest rules. What can be known, what can be lost, and whether the universe keeps its secrets forever. Schrödinger's cat. Imagine a cat, alive and dead, at the same time. It sounds like science fiction, but it's one of the most iconic ideas in quantum physics, Schrödinger's cat. This thought experiment was proposed by Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1935, and it wasn't meant to describe reality, but to mock the strange consequences of quantum theory. Here's the setup. You place a cat in a sealed box. Inside is a radioactive atom, a Geiger counter, a vial of poison, and a hammer. If the atom decays, the counter triggers the hammer, which shatters the vial, killing the cat. But quantum mechanics says that until we observe the atom, it exists in a superposition, both decayed and not decayed. And if the atom is both decayed and not decayed, then the cat must be both alive and dead, until someone opens the box. Only then does the system collapse into one state, alive or dead, not both. This bizarre logic isn't just theoretical. Superposition is a real, measurable phenomenon in quantum particles. They can spin in two directions or be in multiple places at once until observed. But Schrödinger's point was to ask, does this logic hold up in the macroscopic world? Do large objects or even living beings exist in multiple states before we look? Quantum physics doesn't have a clear answer. Some interpretations, like the many worlds theory, say that both outcomes happen, but in separate universes. The cat lives in one, dies in another. Others suggest the act of observation isn't even necessary. That collapse might happen through interactions with the environment itself. Whatever the truth is, Schrödinger's cat forces us to confront a deeply unsettling idea that reality might not be fully real until we observe it.